Hello, and welcome back to plantcare.club, where we care about your plants. My name is Fred, and on this show, we will talk about your plants and answer your questions. So, my background is I am the co owner of a greenhouse in Ontario, Canada, and a nursery in Homestead, Florida. And the goal is to take the information that we learn and that we have at those locations, at commercial growing spaces, and explain how you can apply that to your own plants at your own home. So if you have any questions, go to plantcare.club and you can ask a question there, or you could send it in the comment section below, regardless of where you're watching this or listening to this, and we can get back to you there. Okay, the intro part is never really my favorite, so I'm always glad when the intros are done. So we were looking back at some of the latest episodes that we've done over the last few months and trying to see which ones are most viewed, listened to, most popular, because at the end of the day, the goal is to, give you what you're looking for and what you want. And what we're finding is people are most interested in specific types of plants and their care guides, how to grow them, how to propagate them, how to maintain them, all of those pieces in behind. So that's, I think, what we're going to try to do for the next little while. We might do some one-offs here and there, like we just had our cost of growing series, and that's something that I might really enjoy and want to talk about. But if that's not what you're looking for, then let's try this other route instead and see if this works too. So I'm going to start with Philodendron Birkin. Now, the goal here is I'm going to start with how we would grow it in the greenhouse and walk through the entire life of it. And then, when it goes to stores and how to take care of it in your own home. So this one's easy for me, because we just got some of these into the greenhouse a couple of weeks ago in tissue culture. Now, I have up, if you are listening, I have up a page here that's just a simple Google sheet talking about how to propagate your Philodendron Birkin. And I'm sure that you can go in here and click around if you really wanted to, and there would be some great how-to guides. As far as I can see, most people are saying you have a plant already, you're going to look down, see the new growth points, you want to cut the growth point off, set it in some water, let those roots slowly develop, and then move that into some potting soil. Similar process we use in the greenhouse, but there's a big difference. Big difference is the plants that come to a commercial growing space are all grown in tissue culture labs rather than taken from nodes of existing plants. Because as you can imagine, we might be bringing in thousands, or there are thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of these that are needed every year or every few months. And if you were waiting for this plant's nodes to grow out before you took that cutting, it would take a lot of plants. You would have to have, if you got 3 or 4 per plant, well, you're going to have hundreds of thousands of plants sitting there waiting to grow new nodes for you to ship that across the world. That's not very practical. So what most of the time they do is they take these plants, they grow them out from really small bits in like a petri dish or something into actual cuttings, or what would be a cutting, or a propagating unit basically, and set a little bit of roots on them, and they can ship that out. It's a much faster and more effective way of distributing these young plants. But the difference is these plants that are grown in a lab have never seen the sunlight. So you have to be really careful in a commercial greenhouse of introducing them to sunlight, heat, and humidity. Versus the plants in your home, they have grown up in your own home. So it's not as big of a change, or as big of a difference. So in the greenhouse, when they arrive, you're going to set them into smaller cell units of little bits of dirt, and picture 1-inch cubed little dirt cell, very wet, and you want to set them inside of, if you have your regular greenhouse structure, you almost want to make a small mini greenhouse inside of the greenhouse. It's a piece of plastic on top, there's some plastic on the bottom, and there's plastic walls on the side so that if there's wind that gets in, it can't get right to the plant. It goes around this structure. So boom, your plant is already safe from the wind. Now you want to create a really humid environment. You don't want to soak the plant all the time because the plant isn't used to that, but you want to have so much water in the air, such high humidity that the plant can continually get all the water it needs through its leaves without having big beads of water all over the leaves. And the way that you do that is by creating this little greenhouse structure I'm talking about. In there, you're going to have really high humidity. Some people will even add in fogging nozzles or mist that'll go off. Let's say you add in mist once every hour, once every 30 minutes or something like that for a couple of seconds, and that's going to increase the humidity in this little chamber that you have there. The goal is to create a really high humidity space so the plant is super comfortable. And because there's plastic that's sitting over the top of this hoop area, the sunlight's not going to get directly in. So, okay, you've just saved this plant from direct sun, from the wind, and you have high humidity. Exactly what the plant needs. In our case, in our current situation, about 2 weeks later, we're seeing really good root development all the way to the edge of the cell, starting to spread down to the bottom. So we're looking at great roots at this point. And then you're going to start to introduce that plant to some more of the real world elements. So during the day, we've got this hoop structure, and you pick up the side of it a little bit just to try to add in some wind and reduce the humidity a little bit. Maybe you already have the fog nozzles off as well. So there's less humidity from the fog, and now they have a little bit of wind coming in. So the plant is starting to get used to, oh, okay, this is what the real world is like. Maybe a week later, you have both sides of this little chamber picked up, and then slowly over time, you can get rid of the plastic over the top. You can put in maybe a mesh fabric above. That way you get some blockage of light, like the light intensity isn't as high as direct sunlight, but it's a little bit shaded. So you're slowly introducing these plants to the real elements over a month and a half, basically. And while I'm talking about this, I'm going to try to bring up a I just spelled propagating very incorrectly if you're listening to this, but I'm trying to find a propagating house. Propagating house structure. Let me see. Okay, I can't see anything here. And well, luckily, thank you, Google, for changing that for me. No, I can't see anything here. I will eventually find this. Maybe I'll put it into some show notes or something like that, just so that you get a good idea of what I'm talking about instead. Because if I could pull it up, I should have started with that anyway. But I hope that I've kind of described the way that it's done in the greenhouse. Now, in your own home, as I mentioned, you're going to cut off that node. You're going to set it in some water, hoping that it's going to slowly start to shoot some roots. Once you see roots coming out, then you set it into some soil. Now from there, it's a similar dance to what I described in the greenhouse, where you don't want to not give it any water and just say, let those roots grow, I'm going to push this thing along, because the plant isn't established enough, it can't really do that. But if you continue to give it mist and water, and you keep it in like maybe more of a shady area, and it's got the perfect environment, it's just going to sit there. It's going to think that, oh, I don't need to continue growing my roots. I can just exist for the rest of my life exactly as I am. I'm just going to be lazy and sit here. And you don't want either of those. So you want to slowly wean off the resources you give it as you see it progressing on its own. And it's a delicate balance there where you're trying to balance those two things out. I would say that as you see roots coming out to the edge of the soil area that you have it sitting in, you can really start reducing, for sure no mist at that point. You can start to reduce a little bit of the water. If you give it water regularly, and the water is all the way up to the top of the, let's say you have a 1 inch square soil cube. If you give it water continuously, or regularly and is always wet, the roots are not going to be incentivized to go lower in the plug. They're going to sit right up there along the top. So if you have water closer to the bottom, it's going to incentivize those roots to continue diving deeper and going lower and lower so that it can grab that water. Um, that would be another tip there. Outside of that, oh, and then of course, you don't want to give it so much sunlight that it goes into shock right away. Wherever your Philodendron Birkin was sitting before is probably a really great place that you can put it. You could set it right one beside the other because it's used to that environment, it's used to that spot. So it's not a big change or a shock for it. So let's assume that you're doing well, you're propagating, it's going pretty well, or you've just purchased this plant from somewhere else. And now on the greenhouse side, the plant has the plant is propagated. It's got roots all the way to the edge. The grower is probably going to move it from that little 1-inch square cell into let's say a 4-inch or a 6-inch pot. There are some that I see, like I have seen them very rarely in like an 8-inch pot, but most of the time it's a 4-inch or a 6-inch that you're going to see a Philodendron Birkin because they have that really compact, tight, smaller habit. When you get to an 8-inch, 10-inch, 12-inch, you want larger, big, wow, like you want it to be a really big, showy plant. With a 4-inch and a 6-inch, you don't want it, usually the customer doesn't want it to be enormous. They can have something a little bit smaller because it's going in a smaller spot. On a desk, on a counter, on a, let's say, like a windowsill, something like that. If you have something crazy big, it's just not going to fit. So usually the 4-inch, 6-inch, that's their habit. That's what they naturally grow in. The grower's going to let it sit there for, depending on where they are and how many resources they give it. If they're pushing it along with fertilizer and the right level of heat and everything else, it could be a few months for it to finish out in a 4-inch. If they're trying to take it a little bit slower, they're not really pushing it along as much. Maybe it takes, a few months longer than that. I would say somewhere between like 3 to 6, 9 months, somewhere in there, depending on what size you're doing and what specs you're looking for. Now it gets to the homeowner. So you've purchased your plant from the store, you bring it home. How are you going to take care of that? Well, just as I mentioned, the greenhouse is going to have it in a not direct sunlight, a knocked down, maybe part sun. You can give it maybe a little bit of early morning sun, and then the rest of the day you want it to be a little bit shadier. I would suggest on the north side of the house would be a great idea. It's assuming that you are in the northern hemisphere, because that way it's not getting direct sunlight from that side, but by a window, so it's getting some bright indirect light from there. You're going to want to water it, I would say 2 times a week, depending on how warm your house is. If you have, it's funny when I give watering advice to different people because I have to ask them what they keep their house at for their air conditioning. Some people, you'll walk in and it could be 19 degrees, and other people just don't have air conditioning at all. It's not a common thing for them. So it's a key factor. The difference between 19 degrees in your home versus 25, the plants are going to want water at a much different rate. If you start to see some of the leaves going a little bit yellow, which is a common thing that I do see, you're going to want to add in a little bit of fertilizer, especially the bottom leaves. When those bottom leaves are starting to go a little yellow, add some fertilizer. I'm just looking up Philodendron Birkin again because that way everyone remembers what exactly they look like. And I'm trying to see if I could find any of the lower yellow leaves. If some of these bottom leaves that are older to the plant has had for a long time, starting to go a little yellow, yeah, fertilizer for sure. It is natural for them to lose those bottom leaves and add on new leaves at the very top, completely normal. There are situations where they will start to lose some of their variegation as they get a little bit older, and sometimes that's due to a nutrient deficiency, we found. So you want to make sure that you continually, maybe once a month or once every 3 weeks, give it some more fertilizer, whether that's slow release or that's liquid fertilizer that you're adding in. I would try to add some of that in. Watch the new growth because you will see yellowish leaves that come as a new leaf is forming. It's going to come out as a bit more yellow, it looks, and eventually over time it's going to start to get that dark green outside with the white variegation in the middle. If you start to see one that comes out yellowish, don't get concerned. It's going to be totally fine. The root systems on some of these can be finicky and they can be susceptible to root rot. So you are not going to want to overwater this. You want to make sure that you are leaning towards not enough water versus too much water. That's for sure. You want to be on the conservative side with some of these because they don't suck up as much water as, let's say, like a ficus lorata. Like a ficus is going to suck up a lot. So I'm hoping that I've covered. Oh, and one other thing. Let's say you wanted to up pot it. If you were going to go from a 4-inch to a 6-inch, let's say something like that, what would I suggest and how would you do it? Well, first off, of course, you're going to have your pot. I'm just trying to think of the soil that would go around it. I would want really well-draining soil to go around that plant. It's going to help the roots establish and go a little bit lower. Philodendron roots aren't always the most aggressive, so you want to give it a soil medium that's a little bit easier for it to move through. If you have hard clay style soil, it's harder for those roots to kind of penetrate through and get to the edge or get to the bottom of the container that it's sitting in. So I would try to use some fluffier, lighter soil around the outside. And once again, when you're trying to encourage root development, in the next little while, I would try watering from the bottom again, from the bottom of the pot up. Keep the bottom a little bit more moist and the top not as wet, because that's going to encourage those roots to work their way down and find where the water is. If you just keep putting the water, let's say you moved it from a 4-inch to a 6-inch, you have your soil around the outside, you plunk it in, you say, okay, let's go, let's get ready for this. You pour water right where the root system is of that 4-inch. It's going to take a lot longer for those roots to move all the way out and down to the bottom because the plant doesn't think that it needs to move. The plant's just saying, oh, well, where my roots are, I have water. So I don't need to keep trying to find more water. It's right there. I have everything that I need. So try to water from the bottom up because that will encourage that root development. I'm hoping I've covered everything here. If I haven't, leave a comment below or head to plantcare.club. You can ask a question about Philodendron Birkin or really any other type of plant that you're looking for tips or information on. That's it for me for today. Thank you for listening and talk to you again soon.